Chapter 7, Global Markets in Actions. Here we're going to break in Chapter 1 and 2. In this introduction, we could have applied that, and I do commonly apply that to both macro and micro discussions. But now as we move and transition into Chapter 7, we are definitely going to put on our macroeconomics hats and take more of a macro view. So put our objectives up here real fast. And let's get started. All right, international trade today. As we previously looked at globalization. And I don't think I have to tell you how big globalization is. It's enormous right now in our economy. It's enormous in worldwide economy. Some statistics. In 2013, global exports and imports were $23 trillion. All right. What drives international trade?
Demand.
Well, demand, but think back to how the United States economy, how we've transitioned, are more of an agricultural based in the previous century. We went through a mechanical manufacturing phase, and now we are largely dependent on service. So if we're focusing on service, that means that in order to fuel our manufacturing needs and our agricultural needs, we're relying on global markets. What would influence that globalization is which nation has that comparative advantage. So we're going to say that the basis for comparative advantage is divergent opportunity costs between two countries. Okay, the United States has a comparative advantage right now in services. Other countries, perhaps due to lower wages, less restriction, they have a comparative advantage in agriculture and manufacturing. All right, so let's look at an example of global markets involving t-shirts between the United States and China. All right, let's recap what I just said. All right, the opportunity cost of producing a t-shirt in China is lower than in the United States. Okay, go home and look at your clothing and see how much is manufactured here in the United States. So in figure 7.1, what we're going to be given right here. All right, so the U.S. demand curve is the blue line with D subscript U.S. And the U.S. supply curve is capital S subscript U.S. All right, so what we see here is that domestically, the price of a t-shirt right now with no trade restrictions is $8. And at $8, 40 million t-shirts will be bought inside the United States. Now, what happens when we combine this with the international markets? So let's look at the international markets, and remember, we're comparing this with China. So here, the U.S. market for t-shirts with international trade. All right, world demand for and world supply of t-shirts determined that the worldly price would be $5. So if the world price is set at $5, what do you think is going to happen to the US price? Remember, in the US, our price is set at $8 a shirt, and at $8 a shirt, we're going to buy 40 million. Now, all of a sudden, the world price is set at $5. Okay, if the world price is set at $5, we would expect the price in the United States to fall to $5. And at $5, we see that 20 million less t-shirts would be manufactured. And in fact, we would import that difference. So if we intertwine the world markets through globalization, we see the effects here. The US price is going to lower. This shows us where the amount of shirts made by US garment makers is going to fall to 20 million. And now at $5 a shirt, consumers are willing to buy 60 million t-shirts. Okay, remember, when the price fell, the amount demanded increased. But US manufacturers were not willing to manufacture at that lower price. So we see where US manufacturing decreases and the amount that we export would increase. Okay, why the United States exports airplanes. So now figure 7.2a. Here we have the US demand and US supply. And again, at first, we're going to illustrate using no international trade. So again, the US domestic curve, D subscript US. The US domestic supply curve is S subscript US. And the domestic supply and demand is going to determine that $100 million and 400 million airplanes. So the price of a plane is 100 million, and at that price, Boeing and its competitors are going to produce 400 a year. And I guess we're focusing on the US, so let's look at just Boeing. So Boeing's willing to produce 400 at that price. Now, let's look at the world trade. So world demand and world supply of airplanes determined that the price of an airplane is 100 million. All right, so this is going to exceed the United States price of 100 million. And we say that the United States has a comparative advantage in production. We can produce them for a lower cost. So inside the United States, though, with international trade, the price of an airplane rises to 150 million. And quantity produced or quantity bought, we'll say, decreases to 200 million. It's an important principle. As price falls, assuming all other factors are held constant, as price rises, cost rises, demand, we expect to decrease. And at 150 million, Boeing would produce 700 planes, right? Maximizing profit. So the cost increased, they're going to manufacture more. So what's going to happen? How are we going to meet that demand? All right, so right here we see the price in the U.S. market is going to rise. We just said from 100 million to 150 million, and U.S. plane production is going to increase to 700. As U.S. purchases of airplanes decrease to 200 million, so the United States is going to export the difference, or 500 million. All right, international trade lowers the price of an imported good and raises the price of an exported good. If you are a buyer of the imported good, you're going to benefit from lower prices. If you're the seller of an exported good, you're going to benefit from the higher prices. But who wins and loses? All right. Figure 7.3a. So here's the United States with no international trade. We're going back to t-shirts. So the green area here is going to show consumer surplus, and the blue area is going to show producer surplus. So right now, equilibrium at a price of $8 per t-shirt, 40 million of t-shirts will be produced. So look, producer surplus in the blue, consumer surplus in the green. Now again, the world price, let's compare this to the world markets. So the world price is $5. So look what happens to the consumer surplus area. It's going to expand the area including A, B, and D. So if we carve out that area of A plus B plus D, that represents our new consumer surplus. Now, as consumer surplus increases, producer surplus shrinks. Where it was the area of B and C, it's now only going to be represented by C. And just look at the area under C, the area involving C, I'm sorry. Right here, we are at a price of $5. So less than the price of $5 is going to represent the producer surplus. All right, figure 7.4. Again, gains and losses from exports, another view. Here we're looking at the United States with no international trade. So the green bar is going to show consumers, the green triangle is going to show consumer surplus. The B triangle is going to show producer surplus. Now, what happens in the United States market when we involve international trade? So again, back to our illustration of Boeing and the airplane. All right, so right here with international trade, remember the price of the airplane rose from 100 million to 150 million. So consumer surplus is going to shrink. Producer surplus is going to expand and include now B plus C plus D. Area B that we just included represents a transfer of surplus from consumers to producers. And area D is an increase in total surplus. That is what we gain from exporting. All right, governments. How do governments come in and restrict international trade? We said governments sometimes get involved. So how can a government come in and restrict international trade? All right, other points. All of these are being discussed right now, but one way is we can talk about tariffs, import quotas. We'll look at some other barriers and even export subsidy. All right, a tariff is a tax on a good that is imposed by the importing country when an imported good crosses its boundary. For example, the government of India imposes a 100% tariff on wine imported from the United States. So that is when wine, U.S. wine, is transferred and exported to India, the price increases by 100%. Okay, let's look at the effect of tariffs. All right, so free international trade. So all right, so let's look right here. So this is before, again, we're going to focus on t-shirts. So figure 7.5 here in part A shows the market before the government would impose any tariff. When you said that the t-shirt price, the world price of a t-shirt is $5. Okay, so at this level, with free trade, Americans are willing to buy 600 million t-shirts or 60 million t-shirts a year. And we said previously that U.S. garment makers would produce 20 million t-shirts a year, and we would export 40 million. Now, let's assume that the United States is victim of, and I shouldn't say victim, but let's just say that we are on the receiving end of a tariff that is going to raise the price in the United States. So now our shirts are going to raise by that $2 tariff. So when a $2 tariff is introduced, the price rises to $7. U.S. production increases. U.S. purchases decrease. Price rolls. Consumers are spending less. So as U.S. production increases and U.S. consumption decreases, the United States is going to increase the amount imported, because the U.S. is going to collect the $2 tariff and look at that as a form of revenue to the government on each t-shirt that is imported. And we can see the total of this tariff revenue right here in the purple area.